Well, tonight is really kind of a fun program. So let me welcome you to the November 4th, 2021 program of the Tucson Cactus and Succulent Society. Our speaker tonight is William Lawrence, and we call him Larry Bird, not the tall basketball player, the other Larry Bird, the curator emeritus of the National Museum of American History at the Smithsonian Institute. I mean, this is we're so proud to have him as our member and friend. His talk tonight is about the history and the popular imagery of the saguaro cactus. He has a book that's available that he's going to talk about, and it's for sale after the meeting. So sit back and enjoy In the Arms of Saguaros, Iconography of the Giant Cactus. Please welcome Larry Bird. Larry?
Okay. Can we have the lights down, please, Doug? Yeah, that too. There you go. How's that? Okay. First slide. Oops. So this talk No? Okay. All right. So this talk is about how the saguaro became the thing that you think about when you think about the American West. And by iconography, I mean strong, defining images. There we go. And memorable associations. Okay. Impressions that you've been accumulating in your head since you were a kid, and that you can add to from anywhere, particularly now in our visual culture in which events aspire to a certain viral quality. But tonight, I want to turn the clock back and look at the earliest attempts to transplant saguaros after the railroad arrived in the 1880s. And from that decade, move forward to the mid-20th century, and the travel and tourism boosters who made the saguaro into their most effective symbol of fun in the sun, leisure, and recreation. I'm sorry, the clicker isn't really quite doing the job. How about when I point, if you could just move it forward? And I'll pretend to run the clicker. So this is a 19th century station at San Antonio, and I have a little better postcard of it. You can see the saguaro in a brace on the left there, people contemplating it. And this would have been visible as you came through the town as a passenger, whether you got on the railroad or not. The next slide, please. Yeah. There we go. So this is from that time in the 1880s, late 1880s, to the mid 20th century. Okay, so the method is from the object out. In other words, the method that I'm using to select the pictures is closer to art, or maybe it's like an exhibit that you walk through, which always begins with something interesting to look at and to think about, or as one of my late museum friends used to say, kicks your brain into gear. So let's go. Okay, thank you. This is a magazine that I picked up, and this is really the beginning of my story with this subject. I found this in a used bookstore in Washington, D.C. after I spent time here mean, here in Tucson, and had experience with the plant. But it wasn't quite in this way. I mean, like, where did this come from? And that was my reaction when I saw it. And the date of the magazine is 1950, and it's completely in black and white. And it's a kind of an annual picture survey. And I brought it here tonight. It's all coffee stained, but this is how it actually came to me. And I know that the photographer is Ray Manley, who was Tucson's own, and he was just starting out in professional life as a guest ranch photographer. And to me, it's a successful photo because it got me to stop and pick it up. But then on second thought, I'm looking at it going, what happened? Where are the spines? What's going on with the spines? Because the way he frames the model in the arms of Saguaro, it's an interesting choice for a cover. It's a stand-in for all of Arizona, the way they have the headline splashed across it. But it's hardly possible to get closer to the plant. And so I'll come back to that. But the root of the Saguaro's success as a symbol, not just for Southern Arizona, but for all of the West, lies in the assumptions that people have picked up over the years about where it lives or where they think it lives. And this is sort of where the fun begins, because it's a self-created, imagined habitat up here in your head. And it's a kind of a playful thing. But let's face it, the Saguaros have had a lot of help in the early days, transplanted around the country for Arizona gardens in California, at railroad stations where passengers would see them in Texas, displays at World's Fairs, and all of this happened outdoors before they enjoyed the protection of hothouses. And this one happens to be the Phipps Conservatory in Pittsburgh, where they actually had to put plants in hothouses to protect them from the smoky city. But you could see them in hothouses in St. Louis, New York, or one of my favorites, England. England. And this one is actually in a private collection in Mersey, and the date is 1901. So what I'm going to talk about is transplanting Arizona, that is the movement and the display of plants all around, the ranch owners who adopted the saguaro as a main part or central feature of their advertising, and finally the viral photographs that took liberties with the plant. So first, transplanting Arizona. In 1880, this imagery took an exponential leap forward when the railroad arrived at Tucson. Now, the railroad comes to us from the west. They're not working east to west, as you might think of it. It's coming from the west. Later on, it'll hook up and take you all the way east. But as a consequence, the first things that got on and made the return trip were cacti. And the leading example was the Arizona garden at the Hotel Del Monte on the Monterey Peninsula. And when you think of this Monterey, you think of the lone cypress out there hanging on the cliff that they wire up and they trademark, and it's Pebble Beach and everything. But all of that was 40 years after this. I mean, for a time when you thought of Monterey in the 1880s, this is what you thought about. And this woodcut appeared in Harper's in 1887. And note that the plants are all columnar that made them easier to handle. And this garden was bankrolled by the Southern Pacific Railroad's Chester Crocker, who was one of the big four railroad directors. And he assigned a collecting party a locomotive and several boxcars. So just imagine this as your first cactus rescue. The crew included 8 men and 6 teams of horses. And this display proved so popular that his partner Leland Stanford wanted one. So a garden was made for him at Stanford. So the railroad's interest in trophy specimens, here we go, led to a display at the Los Angeles passenger station. And it's all part of the same kind of promotional mindset that builds up passenger traffic. It's of a piece with the Hotel Del Monte. And here's another example of the saguaro that they installed at San Antonio. This is a different view of that earlier postcard. But one of the consequences of their trackside displays is the ambiguity that was created, a postcard at a time, about the plant's habitat, in this case on a well-traveled rail line. And I would suggest to you that this is one of the ways that the saguaro came to own an imaginary range, which morphed into a symbol of the West. And that in terms of this novel imagery just overwhelmed its actual habitat. And the sender of this card, for example, who apparently came from Ohio and may have traveled no farther than Texas, wrote, "This is the picture of the depot at which I arrived in coming to San Antonio, and the cactus was brought here from New Mexico and is, as you see, a giant." So even though these plants failed universally from California to Texas, these and other cards remained in circulation for years. But oddly enough, in Tucson, there was only ambivalence about the Saguaros place in picturing its passenger station. And like others we've seen so far, this is today's Amtrak station. The erasure of cacti at the station was the kind of the view of the specially created tourism group in the early 1920s, the Sunshine Climate Club, whose literature promoted trees and lawns greet you on arrival. This view, this concept, the idea, whatever you want to call it, has been carried out unchanged since that time, but it dates to even before that. There we go. When local business groups like the Chamber of Commerce when they talked to the outside world, shady streets and shiny shoes and residential architecture was what they talked about and was the norm. But by the end of the 1880s, as access to new plants opened across the Sonoran Desert, many individuals took up cactus collecting, and some personally ventured into the field, and there's some interesting stories about that. But most traded in the pleasures of a small garden or perhaps maybe just a pot on a windowsill. Philadelphia nurseryman Albert Blanc advertised cactus collecting as a democratic hobby for all. Blanc offered Sirius giganteus, the king of the cactus family, beginning at 6 inches for $1.50 to 6 feet tall for $50. So Mr. Blanc of Philadelphia has identified a market and is meeting a need. That same year in 1889, the Baltimore Cactus Society gets organized, and it holds what its leaders promote as the first cactus exhibition in America in 1893. Now I want to zoom in here. Harper's rendered it as a social event surrounded by pictures of the giant cactus of the Gila River Valley. And they published the first cactus journal in America, whose second issue featured this pull-out lithograph. It's actually a freestanding photo that just like falls out of the magazine, which is a photograph of their outdoor display. Members lent plants for the summer and retrieved them in the fall. And the display featured rockwork parterres, I love that word, but that's what they are, radiating from a central saguaro. And another important note, the garden was covered and uncovered to protect it from rain. One Baltimore Society member was said to be negotiating with the Mexican Secretary of Development to purchase the plants then being displayed at the Chicago World's Fair. And as you can see, they're mostly golden barrels of all sizes, wonderful plants arranged in a kind of a linear sand pile. And it's not known if the gentleman was successful or not. In St. Louis, Henry Shaw turned his estate into a public garden. The garden continued after his death in 1898 as a leader in research and Victorian display values. 2 columnar saguaros flanked the garden's entrance gate in a formal arrangement that kind of reminds me of Versailles. But just to see how they pulled all of this off, you'll notice, if you look closely, that everything is potted. And to keep these displays together and healthy, occupied 150 laborers who moved the plants in and out of the safety of their winter hothouses. And if you're curious about how they actually do this, this is a recent arrival being uncrated, and it's going to go right in there in that door into the palm house. And it looks like creosote or some other kind of shrub that's padding it out. But in the annals of cactus transplantation, you have to respect the first photo of a fully armed saguaro out of the habitat at Chicago World's Fair in 1893. And this is the seminal World's Fair of architect Daniel Burnham and White City fame. And it was excavated near Tucson with many others and transported to the fairgrounds courtesy of the Southern Pacific. So this is 13 years after the railroad arrives at Tucson. So I want to pull back from this scene. Just imagine backing up about 20 feet and looking to your right. These cyanotypes show you the view of the garden mounted in front of the building, and it too uses this kind of linear sand pile technique, and it's noticeable there are no pots. So this was a purely seasonal display, like the Mexican golden barrels. And from the same corner, there we go, stereo view that's simply entitled The Great Cactus. So meanwhile, over at the fair's territorial building, there was most states had buildings, but Arizona, New Mexico, and Oklahoma shared a building, the territorial building, and the outdoor display there featured a crestate saguaro. And while you can again note the brace and wish that one had been available for the other one closer to the building, what's interesting is the way in which you see visitors posing with the plants. And for many, this has to be their first experience with such a thing. It's a kind of an early saguaro moment. Now, you might think that all of these pictures so far would create or have created a kind of a favorable upward trajectory in the arc of the saguaro's popularity, if only as Arizona's territorial symbol. And you think of this as kind of an arc. This is what I expected to find going into this anyway. But actually, it is an arc, but it's more like an up and down kind of a saw blade. It's going up, but it's kind of, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's like a kind of like a saw blade, which is an apt metaphor for where the plant's iconography is headed into the turn of the century. Because whether the saguaro becomes a symbol or not depends upon who's calling the shots, who's deciding for Arizona, what gets pictured, and how it's pictured, which is to say, how it's framed and presented. One World's Fair visitor from Arizona, for example, complained that the leaders of the territory had lost the opportunity to erect, quote, a statue of abundance, capital A, with a horn of plenty in each hand, instead of the withered and forbidding cactus stalk erected to indicate, we presume, the poverty of Arizona's soil. So he was not happy that he's seeing all of these plants. Now just let that sink in for a minute. So in the matter of dramatizing this particular vision or claim, any number of slides, transparencies, and stereo view cards picture the changes taking place from crops to parks in the territory under irrigation. So let's take a look at some of these. So cacti, large and small, featured as the casualties of irrigation when they were pictured at all. And this state of affairs did little to advance the image of the saguaro beyond its three-dimensional novelty as a stereo view subject. So this is actually a scan of a glass plate that is half of a stereo view. Here's another example of a stereo view of an alfalfa harvest. And there's no economic reason for a saguaro to be saved in an alfalfa field, other than the cost of labor and the expense of a rather thorny and time-consuming removal. Now, if any of you are familiar with the hole in the rock, here are a couple of postcards. This was an early set-aside of parkland in Phoenix. It was given the title Papago Saguaro National Monument. In other words, there would be one national monument like this in Arizona, and this was it. But it pretty quickly changed from the wilderness you see here in 1922, show the saguaro forest yielding to the irrigated features of more like a central park. They got an easement for a canal, and they made a fish hatchery. And this actually removed the area that you see here from further consideration as a national monument. And that designation was later given to the Tanque Verde Cactus Forest, later Saguaro East. But still, the creation of these parks, whether they're national monuments or not, was hardly a sure thing. Even in Tucson, it was a long climb from scenes like this to publicity that traded in the natural topography of the Southwest and its living native plants. But it was eased along by institutions which came here to study native botany and the individuals who took pains to conserve what they had come to study. So citing the new building of the Desert Laboratory, Tumamoc Hill, among the plants was of great importance to laboratory director Daniel McDougall. At the outset of construction, McDougall told his associates to preserve the plants, especially those closest to the building, to avoid the appearance of a sterile structure sometimes seen in new buildings. And this has been a constant ever since. It's sort of the antithesis of the train station here in Tucson. This building actually still has a dark room in it for developing film, which is charming. It's still there. If you ever have a chance to go up and see it, it's really worth it. So framing the desert for scientific research elevated native plants from the shadows of non-native trees and sunken lawns. This is botanist Effie Southworth Spaulding, and this is often used as kind of an epic photo in the history of women in science. But when it was published, it was cropped, showing only a hand, holding the calipers. The novelist and Hollywood screenwriter Harold Bell Wright moved to Tucson for his health in 1915. In early 1920s, he purchased 80 acres of land for a home that he built in the Pueblo Revival style on a low mesa east of the city, not far from here, just beyond Wilmot Road off Speedway. And like the Desert Laboratories' Daniel McDougall, Wright told his construction crew to leave the existing plants undisturbed. He landscaped his driveway up to the mesa with native plants and lit it up at night with electric lights. Now, it's hard to put yourself back in that time to realize that this home and the way it was landscaped and lit was a stunning thing. By all accounts, what Wright did set off a land scramble started by Tucson's winter residents. As a realtor noted, the beautiful desert floor that surrounded the Wright home for miles in every direction opened the eyes not only of Tucson people, but those visitors fortunate enough to see it. Of course, this had been there all along, but what changed was the introduction of a palatial home landscape with native plants. And Wright devised a comparable landscaping plan for the Desert Sanatorium that broke ground west of his estate in 1924. And the landscaping was carried out by Rutger Porter, the young man here between the horse and Wright. And Rutger Porter was the son of Wright's New York publisher who came out after a bout with pneumonia to recuperate for his health. So following Wright's plan for the sanitarium, Porter massed saguaros, barrels, prickly pears along a driveway into the sanitarium. So this is a before photo looking to the south. Now we're going to turn around and look in through those gates to the north. The effect that would created a pleasing effect where there had been none. And this is the street view looking to the north to the Catalinas, of course. And you can imagine that this is probably what the entrance to Wright's driveway looked like too. And Porter went on to become a landscape designer. He established a cactus nursery. As Tucson grew around his Alvernon Way home, it became Tucson Botanical Gardens. And the homes are still there on the property today. And the Desert Sanitarium, as you see here, is Tucson Medical Center. And this is the intersection of Grant and Beverly. But one of the major players in any era who helped raise awareness about native plants in a landscape being changed by urban development was University of Arizona President Homer Leroy Shantz, a botanist, a photographer, and a historical figure. Shantz is most closely associated with the conservation of the saguaro cactus forest that became the national monument and later national park, Saguaro East. Most of what we know about this tract comes from the photos that Shantz made over the years while he was university president from 1928 to 1936. This is one of my favorites, the watermelon cactus. This was just outside the boundary of the park. And you can see here, that's Shantz's car. You can just imagine him. Oh, just one more picture. But Shantz was also instrumental in developing the campus cactus garden seen here in this 1909 postcard of the west front of the main building. And now this is well before he arrived as president in 1928. And the garden was started by a botanist even before this building was built in the early 1890s. And I read somewhere, but I could never confirm the story, that there had been plants that were left over from the dig for the Chicago World's Fair in 1893 that hadn't gone to Chicago, and they were given to the university. And that may be what we're looking at here. Now, I want to use this aerial view from the early 1940s to orient you to the extensive changes that took place under Shantz. A popular figure on campus, Shantz completed the football stadium. You can see, well, I'm going to show this. There it is. There's the football stadium in the upper right corner. And you can see there's a long, long linear garden that extends from Old Main up to the Bear Down Gym. You can go in a little tighter here. That's the garden. And so what we're going to be talking about. So the arrow that I just flashed up there, this area here, I'm going to show you some saguaros that are planted in here. Just to orient you, this little island here, this is what the garden looks like today. That's the area here. Okay, this is where the student union used to be built. And of course, everything else is still here. Okay, so within a year of Shantz's arrival, workers sent to planting prickly pears, ocotillos, and saguaros. And this picture was taken by R.B. Streets, a plant pathologist in the Department of Botany. So everyone in botany at the university is involved in this project. Landscape with rocks and boulders, the trench functioned as a water collecting arroyo. And this is a picture of it a little less than 10 years in. And the below grade paths and shoulder high boulders created an environmental showcase for the plants of the Sonoran Desert. And I just love the kind of the moody look to this. It was below grade. So when you walk through it, your sight lines were sort of just limited to what you could see in the arroyo. A collection of bujums filled out a Mexican garden that were adjacent to the arroyo. They were not down in the arroyo, which was probably a good thing. And this is a photo that Shantz took of Queen of the Night blossoms on the west side of the main building in June 1932. In the years after Shantz retired, university officials let the garden slide with deferred maintenance, much to the concern of Tucsonans and the local community, who pressed them to maintain it. And the arroyo lingered on through the Second World War into the early 1950s. And in 1952, an act of vandalism cut down 3 of the garden's largest saguaros, and those were the ones among the ones that I showed you earlier. The perpetrator or perpetrators were never found. In later years, officials reduced the garden's footprint to its present configuration as an island dedicated to the memory of author Joseph Wood Crouch, across from the university's administration tower, pretty much as you see today, surrounded by trees and lawns with vistas of buildings, which for some people had been the vision all along. I want to shift now to the years bracketing the Second World War, from the late 30s to the early 50s, which saw the upbuilding of Southern Arizona's travel and tourism industry and the role its leaders played in overcoming, let's say, entrenched interests. It was Arizona's guest ranch owners who adopted the saguaro and shaped it as a welcoming symbol, a profound change from the days of land sales propaganda that ignored troublesome native plants and a state seal whose iconography confirmed their erasure. In the business stationery exemplified here, you begin to graphically climb out of that vision and into the arms of saguaros. The way the guest ranch owners picture it, the saguaro is a natural attraction that you relax with, get cozy and cuddle up with, and you can even sleep with it. So guest ranch publicity is the spark of a movement toward a post-war social saguaro framed for creative leisure, relaxation, or my favorite, simple stare out the window contemplation. And there's quite a bit of that going on. The advertising agency of Ernest Cabot and Norval Gill interpreted the saguaro as a freestanding artwork. Cabot and Gill favored the frame technique and graphic designs for a long list of hospitality clients whose brochures fold the viewer's attention right back into the subject at hand. Their logo exemplified this technique, picturing an artist holding a saguaro at arm's length, comparing it to the full-size plant itself in a frame. The firm's artwork deployed window frames in brochures to similar effect. For Tucson's Lazy K Bar Guest Ranch, or just the Lazy K, Cabot Gill created brochures whose largest graphic element was the picture window in the ranch's main lounge. Pictured in successive brochures over the years, the furnishings move around with the ranch's owners who age, but the saguaro in the window is the constant feature around which life for you, the guest, is staged. You can also, okay, there's one more. You can also note the arrangement of Life magazines on the coffee table, which will be important later. And if you're wondering what this looks like today, don't bother. I took this on a cactus rescue out there. And that's it. I got some wonderful plants though. Among enthusiasts of the compositional frame, Charles Herbert, come in, Charles Herbert. Oops, done it now. There we go. The Herberts, these are two photographers. They built their desert home with a picture window that looked out on a massive chandelier type saguaro. Described in the features that they wrote about, the view with the room, the Herberts window framed the most carefully curated saguaro moment in all of southern Arizona. Though siting a home with a scenic view was not a new idea, in the Herberts' understanding of what was important, the saguaro was the critical element. Over the years, they amortized the cost of construction with illustrated articles about it, syndicating stories picturing the view as late as 1947. So I want to talk a little bit about certain photographs with which you may be familiar, but first there's a little backstory. In 1922, the Sunshine Climate Club organized to fund a community advertising campaign to promote the city's winter climate. Ads prepared by a Los Angeles advertising agency soon appeared in national magazines and newspapers all over the place. Each ad featured a coupon to clip and fill out. And the coupon was actually a clever way to compile the names and addresses of prospective visitors who might become new residents. And the advertising agency claimed that they could actually carry this out, and they would have charts that showed who or whom had asked for a booklet, and then they would follow them all the way through, and some actually bought homes. Now, this took years to compile this information, but they did this in the interest of promoting and selling more advertising. Now, the coupon offered a free booklet picturing the city and its environs. It did acknowledge the desert setting. The campaign was effective but expensive and was allowed to drop off in the Depression of the 30s. In 1939, Sunshine Climate President Roy Drachman and photo Charles Herbert of window fame set out to create viral photographs in lieu of paid advertising to promote Tucson. The most well-known and widely reproduced photograph was their cactus bikini or cactus sunsuit that appeared in some 300 newspapers across the nation and around the world, culminating a year later with a full-page story in Life magazine, for which Drachman and Herbert went back out to the desert and restaged the shoot for the story. And though they did not use the word viral, that was the intent, to create photos that would find their way into newspapers and magazines for free without the expense of an advertising agency. They called them gags, gag photos. And although Drachman and subsequent club leaders never dropped their ad agency, the agency wouldn't allow it, gag photo publicity could run concurrently with paid advertising with the coupon if and when the club chose to return to it, which it eventually did in 1950. But the effect of this particular photo of a model wearing cactus parts was off-putting. Touch me not. And that was the headline that they couldn't control. That was given, that was what the newspapers tacked on it. And I think even Drachman recognized that it really didn't work. And so the original gag of wearing the plant led to less invasive poses. it was much easier to pose models on the plants or framed by the plants. Even the Huntington got into the act with this pose for the Year-Round Club of Southern California. And here's Ray Manley and an assistant with a model on a padded ladder. This is in 1954. Here's a barefoot model on a curved arm in 1958, and a model seated on an arm in 1958. And there are literally, I want to say, a couple hundred examples like this that I could just go on and on and on. I mean, this really became a thing. But the pose was applied to publicize activities in other areas, including science. For example, the visualization of end-of-life cactus care pictured the university botanist who'd published theses on the so-called black spot disease, which was necrosis, as they daubed bleach solution on the plants while seated in their arms. Clipped and padded, the saguaro became the lubricant of a distinctly modern Southwest into which anyone might climb. This is Ruth Eggemeyer, the wife of the park superintendent of Saguaro National Monument, posed as a park visitor for Arizona highways with a droop-armed saguaro. And these are the oldest, one of the oldest and most unusually formed specimens that were in the park. And the photo of her leaning into the plant soon appeared on the cover of the park's 10-cent trail guide, inviting visitors, come here, come closer, see this thing. The tipping in, or what we would call pasting up, of saguaros on a Tucson golf course confirmed the saguaro's arrival as the preferred symbol. This is a detail from a Sunshine Climate Club ad in 1950 when they returned to advertising, and it's set on the links of Tucson Country Club. Now, we know that this is Tucson Country Club because the picture had to be explained in advance to Tucsonans, including club members, who may have wondered just what was going on. Let me read it. A substitution of giant cacti for an oak tree on the links is a contribution of photographic art to make a typical Tucson setting. Now, of course, the use of tipped-in, let's call them substitutions, in this case, the saguaros, to make an idealized setting was not new in the history of photography, but nevertheless, this too is a gag. So you've gone from trees and lawns at the train station to cactus bikinis, to posing barefoot models in bathing suits on plants, and now tipping in saguaros over oak trees to manufacture a golf course that didn't exist, although before the golf course was plated and carved out of the desert, perhaps it had. This is what the course looked like at the time. For the 1962 celebration of the golden anniversary of Arizona statehood and the centennial of the founding of the territory, the State Highway Department's map featured a golden anniversary saguaro with gleaming chunks of gold, a suggestion of the commercial habitat that's about to unspool along the nation's highways. And while you can't plot a direct connection between saguaro publicity that attended the big buildup for the golden anniversary of Arizona, the motels and restaurants that chose saguaro theming is highly suggestive. The largest specimen of its kind took root on a hill in Saugus, Massachusetts, a suburb of Boston out on Route 128. Has anyone seen this? You're kidding. Thank you. I'm not making it up. In looking at the roadside saguaro, it seems that the farther you get from its actual habitat, the more liberties you can take with a plant. In this case, the scale necessary to support a giant sign that can be read at a distance for a Western-themed steakhouse. Now, just to give you an idea of the size of this thing, I recently had a chance to visit it and took this picture of its trunk. So, but what's not in question is the power of saguaro iconography to conjure up, to boil down, and to distill the West into a single moment like this one. The owners of a motel or restaurant often appear on the postcards that they give away as advertising. And it's likely them sitting with their saguaro, whiling away the afternoon in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado. And that's probably their Cadillac too. Though meanwhile in Tucson, the social saguaro was heightened with horseback rides, cowboys, Western wear, covered wagons, barbecues, bathing suits, swimming pools, often in the same frame. This is a postcard photo by the master, the aforementioned Ray Manley. In Manly's oeuvre, there were two variations, the pool party by day and the campfire by night. For the Saddle and Surrey guest ranches owners, seen here in matching red shirts and white cowboy hats, Manly sharpened up the drama of the cookout with strobe lights concealed in the rocks of the fire ring. As their follow-up to the country club tricked out with paced-up saguaros, it was inevitable that the Sunshine Climate Club would pace in visitors. From Arizona gardens on the Pacific coast to the nation's world fairs to the framing of social saguaros in books, magazines, newspapers, and on postcards, saguaros shaped ideas about Arizona and the Southwest. But this time, it was understood. Filling in the picture, like the coupon, required little imagination. Saguaro iconography is nothing if not an expression of a human relationship with a plant. Looking back on pictures of people posed with the saguaros, we can see and imagine our most playful and curious selves. We express ourselves. We stop. We touch. We take stock and care in a saguaro moment. Now, since I wrote those closing lines for the book, I've come to realize that it's really the other way around. It's not so much us touching the plants. What's really going on? These plants touch us. Thanks so much.
Yes, questions?
Yeah, questions, comments? Yes. Where did it come from?
Did it grow here or did it grow in Mexico?
Oh, I should have shown you the habitat map. It's unique to the Sonoran Desert, which is from here, Phoenix. There's actually some near Williams, Arizona area. There are actually a couple that cross the Colorado River around Yuma, and it goes all the way down to I can't remember the Mexican town, but it's about evenly, if you look at the habitat map, it's about evenly divided between Arizona and Sonora. Good question. Thank you. Yes.
Excellent presentation. Was that summary of your book, kind of?
Well, it was probably too much. I mean, I just had to narrow it down. No, the book goes much more into, it starts with a habitat map, obviously, and goes through the earlier botanical explorers like William Emery and John Russell Bartlett, who really were the first people to publish images of the native botany. And that became sort of like the standard. These images were later reproduced, ad nauseum, even in some of those cactus guides that I did not show. But they really took liberties with the plant. The process of how you made a lithograph began with a field sketch. And it's like a kind of a game of telephone, where somebody repeats something and it comes out looking like a tree. It's really kind of odd. And then at the end, there are more contemporary pictures of, fashion and that kind of thing that go on. And also the woodcrafters, people who made things like, where's my clicker? What did I do with it? Oh, here. Yeah, there's one last that I just love this one. It's, is it going to go? It's not going to go. Come on. Okay. It's the cover of the book, but it's in a frame. Yes. It's sort of an open question. Those plants were posed on, just endlessly, and they do lose spines as they get older down in the lower, extremities of the plant. But when you're looking at that photo of the woman, almost cradling with it, you really have to wonder, how it was done. Usually it's just done with padding, and if you blow stuff up, you can look at it in detail in ways that you were never supposed to, and you see the board or you see the pad or I mean, it kind of gives it away. But they're so proud of this. I mean, they sometimes just pull back and show you how they're doing it. Like there was that one shot of the ladder and the lighting and the camera and the woman, and you can see the, you know. So it's really, they're really quite proud, you know, how they're able to do this without any harm to anyone, even the plant. Yes. Yeah. Well, I did not show the shoot that resulted. There was after that newspaper picture ran, you know, for a year, Life picked up and turned it into a story. And if you want to publish this one-page story in Life from Life magazine, you need to talk to Meredith Publishing, who owns the rights, not to the photos, but to the layout. And they want a lot of money on a renewable basis for you to use that. But the Arizona Historical Society has all the photos, so I just showed the photos. But that was the reference. I'm sorry, it did fly by there a little bit too quickly. Yes. Yeah, almost all of them have them. I mean, you have to have it, you know. But how they're kept and maintained, it's mostly, I believe, in pots so that they can be, there's a certain, you know, quality to being able to move it around if it's not, you know, doing well or anything. But they can cheat death for quite some time and even bloom, you know, when they're lying on their side out of the ground. No, one of the Desert Laboratory people, Daniel McDougall, he cut off a blooming arm and sent it to a colleague in Nebraska, and it bloomed for 2 years. And the students tried to do everything. They didn't know. I mean, they tried everything to keep it alive. You know, they put it in the ground thinking it was going to grow like anything else does. But yeah, so when you're looking at these photos, you really have to kind of wonder, like, what am I really looking at? Is that plant going to make it, dead or alive? I mean, even some of the transplants around here, they don't make it. Yeah, I think it's a function of the height, but there are experts here that know more about it than I do, more practical experience. Anyone else? Well, thank you very much. I'd be happy to talk to you later if you just come up. Thanks. Thank you.